Military boot camp may be one of the most powerful psychological training systems ever created. It looks like chaos. Drill instructors screaming, recruits running. None of it is accidental. Underneath the yelling and the stress is a set of psychological systems designed to change how people think, react, and perform under pressure. Today, we're breaking down exactly how it works. The first one starts the moment recruits step off the bus. You step off the bus and suddenly everything is happening at once. Multiple drill instructors yelling, orders coming from every direction, lights, noise, movement. They're trying to process everything and it feels impossible. Most people assume this moment is just intimidation, that the drill instructors are simply trying to scare recruits. But psychologically, something much more interesting is happening. What recruits experience in those first moments is something psychologists refer to as cognitive overload, a concept studied by researcher John Sweller. The basic idea is simple. When the brain is flooded with too much information at once, it can't rely on its normal decision-making patterns. The brain becomes overwhelmed. And when that happens, something important changes. Instead of relying on old habits, the brain becomes much more open to new structure and instruction.
I want them to understand and get that culture shock of what's going to be expected of them. Everything that we're going to demand of them and how we're going to demand of them, our expectations. So that way, when it comes to them carrying out the daily tasks or daily missions, that they know we mean business and they know what needs to be and what is expected of them.
In other words, the chaos isn't random. It actually resets how recruits process their environment. Think about it like rebooting a computer. When a system becomes overloaded, sometimes the only way to get it working again is to reset it. That moment when recruits arrive at boot camp is very similar.
The environment that we're put in, we're taken away from our homes, we're out of our beds, and now we're in this uncomfortable, small spring bed with like almost hotel feeling sheets. Anything from the showers to the lights that were beaming in your eyes when you're asleep.
Everything they're used to disappears instantly. Their routines, their comfort, their control. Suddenly, there's only one structure left, the one being given to them by the drill instructors. From that moment forward, recruits start learning a completely new way of operating, not just physically, but mentally. And this is the first psychological system boot camp uses, because once that reset happens, the next system starts immediately. Once recruits get past the initial chaos of arrival, something else starts happening. Pressure. Constant pressure.
There's nothing wrong with that. A healthy level of stress to show them that there are going to be stressful times.
3, 2, 1. 7, 6, 25, 24, 23.
Everything in boot camp suddenly has a time limit. Get dressed in 30 seconds. Get outside in 10 seconds. Move faster, louder again. And if you don't meet that standard, you get introduced to something called IT. Incentive training. Push-ups, mountain climbers, running, more yelling. From the outside, it can just look like punishment.
It's something that they don't enjoy, sir. You wouldn't get your discipline if they did enjoy it.
I want you to pay very close attention to what he says here because we're going to cover this in just a little bit.
However, it is beneficial because as soon as they get IT'd, one person starts telling other recruits, and then they kind of start police calling each other, so it's honestly beneficial, sir.
But psychologically, this system is doing something very specific. It's based on a concept called stress inoculation training developed by psychologist Donald Mitchenbaum. The idea behind stress inoculation is actually pretty simple. When the human brain experiences stress for the first time, it reacts very strongly. Heart rate spikes, decision-making slows down, people panic. But if the brain is exposed to stress repeatedly, the response starts to change. The same situation that once caused panic becomes manageable. Eventually, the brain adapts. What used to feel overwhelming starts to feel normal. This is exactly what bootcamp is doing. Every day, recruits are placed in controlled, stressful situations. Time pressure, confusion, exhaustion, and over time, the brain recalibrates. The stress response becomes smaller. The recruit becomes more functional under pressure. By the end of training, situations that once felt chaotic are just another normal day. And that happens for a very important reason. Because in real-world environments, especially combat environments, stress isn't optional, it's constant. And if someone's brain shuts down under pressure, that can be incredibly dangerous. So instead of avoiding stress, bootcamp teaches recruits how to operate inside it. And that's a second psychological system at work. But bootcamp isn't just changing how recruits respond to stress, it's also changing something deeper, their identity. And that brings us to the next system, One of the strangest things about bootcamp is how quickly individuality disappears. Within hours of arriving, recruits lose their hair. Everyone wears the same uniform. Everyone moves the same, speaks the same. Even the way recruits talk about themselves changes. Instead of saying I, recruits say something very different. This recruit is good.
This recruit.
If you've been through bootcamp, you probably remember that moment when it started to feel normal. But if you stop to think about it, it's actually pretty strange. Why would a training program change the way people refer to themselves? The answer comes from something psychologists call social identity theory, developed by psychologist Henry Tajfel. The basic idea is that people naturally define themselves based on the groups they belong to: family, friends, teams, professions. The more time someone spends operating inside a group identity, the more their brain starts to see that identity as part of who they are. Bootcamp just accelerates that process. Everything about the environment reinforces one message: you are no longer operating as an individual, you are part of a unit.
It's really all about making those civilians that were turned into recruits into better recruits and further ingrain the military and Marine Corps lifestyle on those individuals.
The uniforms remove visible differences, the language removes individual focus, the routines reinforce shared identity. Over time, the brain starts to shift. Instead of thinking like a civilian, recruits begin thinking like Marines, and this change happens surprisingly fast. Because identity isn't just something we believe, it's something we practice. Every time recruits act like Marines, their brain slowly starts to see them that way. And once that shift begins, it unlocks the next psychological system. Because now recruits don't just think about themselves differently, they start thinking about each other differently too. And that's where group psychology comes into play.
Before I came in here, I didn't know anything about the Marines, but the classroom taught me a lot more than I knew. It teaches you how to take care of each other, how to work as a unit, how to fight together, how to stand together, and die together if it comes down to it.
If you talk to almost anyone who has been through boot camp, there's one moment they all remember. One recruit messes something up. Maybe someone talks when they're not supposed to. Maybe somebody moves too slow. Maybe someone forgets a piece of gear. And suddenly, everybody pays. Push-ups, running, IT, the entire platoon. When you first see this, it feels incredibly unfair. Why punish everyone for one person's mistake? But psychologically, this system is extremely powerful. It taps into something psychologists call group cohesion, a concept studied for decades in social psychology and military research. The short version is simple. Groups become stronger when their success and failure are tied together. When individuals know that their actions affect somebody else, people stop thinking purely about themselves. They start thinking about the group. In boot camp, this change happens fast. At the beginning, recruits mostly worry about their own performance. Did I mess up? Am I in trouble? But once collective punishment starts happening, the mindset shifts. Now recruits are watching each other, helping each other, correcting mistakes before the drill instructors even notice.
Keeping each other accountable is really important, even when drill instructors aren't around, so we act correctly and learn how to be Marines.
Not because they were told to, but because their brain understands something very important. If one person fails, everybody feels it. And that pressure creates something the military depends on: trust. Because eventually recruits realize they are only as strong as the people standing next to them. And once that mindset forms, bootcamp introduces the next psychological system, the one that turns training into instinct. By the time recruits reach the later weeks of bootcamp, the chaos from the beginning begins to disappear. Movements become sharper, commands are followed instantly. Entire platoons start moving almost like a single unit, left, right, no hesitation, no confusion. From the outside, this part of bootcamp can look pretty repetitive. Drill, repetition, practicing the same movements over and over again. But psychologically, this repetition is doing something extremely important. It's building something called procedural memory, a concept studied by cognitive psychologist Larry Squire. Procedural memory is a type of memory responsible for automatic skills. Things like riding a bike, driving a car, typing on a keyboard. At first, those actions require conscious thought. After enough repetition, something changes. The brain moves those actions into a completely different system, a system designed for automatic behavior.
There may be a circumstance where they're put into, where they don't have that luxury to do that in combat, where they have to understand instant willingness and obedience to orders.
You stop thinking about the action, you simply do it.
Grab the canteen up and go over. Aye, sir.
And this matters because in high stress environments, the brain doesn't always have time to think things through. Heart rate increases, adrenaline spikes, decision making becomes harder. In those moments, people don't rise to the level of their intentions, they fall back on the level of their training. Bootcamp understands this. That's why movements are repeated again and again and again. Commands are drilled endlessly. Procedures are practiced until they feel automatic, because when pressure rises, automatic behavior is faster than conscious thought. And Bootcamp uses this system not just to teach skills, but to turn those skills into instinct. And this leads me to the final and perhaps the most interesting part of all of Bootcamp: the discipline. There's something so strange about the way recruits are corrected in Bootcamp. Even when someone does something right, they still get corrected. Uniform inspection, drill movements, cleaning, speaking.
I need his gate out and then... My! That's recruit, sir!
Recruits quickly realize something. Perfection doesn't mean praise. It usually means another correction. At first, this can feel very frustrating, but psychologically, there's a reason for it. The system comes from a concept called operant conditioning, developed by psychologist B.F. Skinner. The principle is simple. Human behavior is shaped by consequences. Actions followed by negative consequences tend to disappear. Actions that avoid those consequences tend to increase. Bootcamp uses this idea in a very specific way. Instead of constantly rewarding correct behavior, drill instructors apply relentless correction. Mistakes are immediately addressed. Standards are constantly raised, and recruits quickly learn something important here. The goal isn't praise, the goal is precision. Over time, recruits stop performing tasks just to avoid punishment. They perform them because the correct behavior has become automatic. The standard becomes internal. And by the time recruits graduate, the external pressure that shaped their behavior is no longer necessary, because the standard is now inside them. When people watch Bootcamp from the outside, they usually see the obvious things: the yelling, the exhaustion, the discipline. But underneath all of that, something much more structured is happening. From the moment recruits step off the bus, Bootcamp begins applying a series of psychological systems. First, it's shock and cognitive overload that resets how recruits process their environment. Then, stress conditioning teaches the brain how to function under pressure. Identities begin to shift from individual to Marine. Group responsibility builds trust inside the platoon. Repetition turns training into instinct, and constant correction shapes behavior until the standard becomes automatic. None of this is random. Every part of the environment pushes the brain in a specific direction. And that's why Bootcamp looks the way it does, because it isn't just physical training, it's psychological training. And once you understand the psychology behind it, Bootcamp stops looking like chaos and starts looking like one of the most structured training systems ever created. The yelling may get your attention, but the psychology is what actually makes the Marine. If you're a veteran watching this and you're struggling with the VA disability process, ProVet Consulting helped me personally go from 50% to 100% disability. I put my referral QR code on the screen if you want to check them out. They do give me a small referral bonus, which helps support the channel. And as always, a video is going to pop up on your screen I made just for you. And until next time, see ya!